It was the fall of last year when I found the perfect apartment, right in the heart of the city, close to work. The rent was unbelievably low, and the place was spacious. The landlord mentioned that the previous tenant had passed away unexpectedly, but everything had been cleaned and was in order. I was eager to move in, not thinking too much about the apartment's past. The first night in the apartment, I felt an eerie presence, but I brushed it off as first-night jitters. As days passed, I noticed strange things. I would hear footsteps in the hallway late at night, yet I never saw anyone. Sometimes, the living room would be slightly rearranged, but I didn't recall moving anything. One evening, while making dinner, I heard faint whispers coming from down the hall. I followed the sound to the closed door of the second bedroom, the room that had remained untouched since I moved in. The whispers stopped as soon as I approached, leaving an overwhelming silence in the air. I stood there, heart pounding, then slowly turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty, exactly as it had been the day I moved in. Confused, I shut the door and tried to ignore the strange occurrence. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of someone muttering my name outside my bedroom door. The voice was low and insistent. Panicked, I locked the door and pushed my dresser in front of it. The muttering stopped, replaced by soft, deliberate footsteps that faded down the hallway. The next morning, shaken, I called the landlord to tell them about the strange occurrences and asked if anyone else had access to the apartment. The landlord's response chilled me to the bone. There's no one else living there. The apartment has been vacant since the last tenant passed away. I didn't wait to hear more. I packed my things and left that very day, unable to shake the feeling that whatever or whoever was in that apartment had been watching me the entire time. It was early spring when I desperately needed a roommate to help cover the rising rent costs. The new roommate responded to my ad almost immediately, moving in just days after we spoke. They seemed like a perfect match. Quiet, tidy, and they kept to themselves. But as the weeks went by, I started noticing something strange. The roommate would vanish for days on end without any explanation. They would just disappear, leaving behind an empty room, only to reappear without a word, acting as if nothing had happened. At first, I didn't question it. People have their own lives, after all. But the third time it happened, I started getting worried. One rainy evening, when they had just returned after another one of their mysterious disappearances, I decided to ask where they had been. They looked at me with a blank expression and said, "I never left." I was confused and pointed out that I had seen them leave, heard the door close, watched them walk down the hallway. But they just smiled, their eyes dull, and said, "You must be imagining things." Then, things got even stranger. Each time they vanished, small things would go missing. My toothbrush, a pair of shoes, even food from the fridge. When I asked them about it, they just shrugged and said, they must have taken it. Who? I asked, but they just walked away, leaving my question unanswered. One stormy night, I was woken by the sound of the front door creaking open. I crept out of my room to investigate and found the roommate standing in the dark, staring at the door. "What are you doing?" I whispered. They slowly turned to me, their face pale and expressionless. "They're here," they whispered back. Before I could ask who they meant, they vanished right in front of me, dissolving into thin air. I ran back to my room, locked the door, and stayed awake all night. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen table, written in their handwriting, "Don't let them in." I moved out the next day, but even now, months later, I still have nightmares about what, or who, was sharing that apartment with me. I had been searching for a new place for months when I finally stumbled upon a small, cozy apartment in an old building. The rent was reasonable, and the location was perfect. The only strange thing was that one of the rooms was locked, and the landlord mentioned that the key had been lost long ago. The room was completely off limits, but the rest of the apartment was in great shape, so I decided to take it. I moved in with minimal furniture, settling into my new life quickly. My roommate was friendly enough but a bit peculiar. They never asked about the locked room, and we mostly kept to ourselves. However, I couldn't shake the curiosity that gnawed at me about what might be behind that door. Late at night, I would hear soft thuds and scraping sounds coming from the locked room. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, or maybe rodents. But as the nights went on, the noises became more distinct, more deliberate, like something was trying to get out. One evening, I decided to confront my roommate about the noises. They looked at me with wide eyes and said, "You've heard them too, haven't you? It's better not to ask questions. Just leave it alone." Their response only fueled my curiosity. I started searching for the key, hoping to find it hidden somewhere in the apartment. I checked every drawer, every nook, and every cranny, but found nothing. The more I searched, the more obsessed I became. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of something banging against the door. It was loud and frantic, like someone, or something, was trapped inside, desperate to get out. My heart pounded as I crept toward the locked room. The banging stopped, suddenly, replaced by complete silence. I stood there, staring at the door, and before I knew it, I was reaching for the doorknob. I knew it was locked, but as I touched it, I felt it turn slightly, like the lock had given way just a little. I pulled my hand back in fear, and the door suddenly jerked violently as if something was pushing against it from the other side. Terrified, I backed away and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. The next morning, I packed my things, ready to leave the apartment for good. Before I left, I glanced one last time at the locked door. It was slightly ajar. I hadn't touched it since the night before, yet it was now open just a crack, as if inviting me to look inside. But I didn't dare. I slammed the front door behind me and never looked back.